Today's guest is Matt Hallock. He is an author, speaker, and fellow podcaster who has hit rock bottom in his life 10 years ago in more ways than one. And he is now on a mission to help Christian men overcome some of the damaging and ineffective mindsets that they live with. He was able to restore his marriage and end his depression. And he is here today to talk to us about all of that. I'm Kelly Case, and this is the Unhindered Podcast. Hi, Matt.
Hey Kelly, good to be here with you today. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you. Can you tell my audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I have written a book, The DNA of a Man. That's kind of started the whole everything that I do now with men. I started off just by putting the lessons that I had learned from like you said in like hitting rock bottom into book form because I knew it was needed. And so from writing that book, people bought it. People wanted to work with me. So I coach men. I do one-on-one coaching with them, helping them find their confidence, helping them rebuild attraction in their marriages if it feels like they're kind of losing their wife's spark. Help them connect with God and learn how to hear His voice and walk in closer connection with Him, and instead of feeling like they're kind of on his B team but other people are on his A team and stuff. And I help them get in touch with what their God-given mission is as well. So yeah, I do coaching. I have different courses. I do group intensives at times as well. Just this mission is something that is has overtaken me in the last 5 years, and I'm happy that it has. So yeah.
Awesome. Very exciting. Very exciting. Um, I was excited to talk with you because I know we're aligned in so many ways. As not only are we both podcasting, but we both had health crises and journeys that we've taken there. And then I am a marriage counselor, and a lot of what you work with men on is restoring their marriage. And so I'd love to talk about that with you today, especially. I know I did read your book, it was very good. And in it, you talk about one of the things that men do. I think we all do this, but we'll say men for now. They sometimes will make an idol out of something that they shouldn't. Something like make an idol of success or of their physique or of their marriage or even of themselves. Can you talk to me a little bit more about your viewpoints on that?
Yeah. So the the importance of that concept of idols in our life, for me, uh, it it's it has a facet to it that I think doesn't get talked about a whole lot in church. So in church culture, you hear about idols, and you hear about primarily, which is true and good and right. You hear about primarily how that means that you are worshiping something other than God, and that thing is occupying the space that only He should occupy. And again, that's all correct. But I I've learned that a very important piece of that idolatry discussion is what it costs you when you have an idol like that. And it's not just costing you, because now you're sinning and you shouldn't do that. It's costing you the ability to walk through your life in confidence, in joy, in a healthy level of self-worth too. Because when you're starting to idolize something, let's say, so in my book I talk about back in high school, it was my ability to play baseball. And by idolizing that, I wouldn't have said that I actually like worshipped baseball or worshipped my ability to play it. I wouldn't have even have thought that. I at that time I loved Jesus more than anything else that I could think of. So it wasn't even really for me a matter of loving something more than Him. It was a matter of finding my happiness in it, finding my self-worth. And if I played well, then I could be happy. And if I didn't play well, then I couldn't be happy. And so I think that facet of idolatry is possibly under discussed, and we don't realize when we're doing it. And so for me, I transferred my idolatry of baseball over to my marriage because my wife and I met in high school, and so it was a very seamless transition. Uh, but when this incredibly gorgeous girl starts to be interested in me, and I in her, and there's just so much uh, happiness that happens from that. I want more of it. And I begin to seek that more than being anchored in my identity in God. So the idolatry is just, it's deadly. And it almost, I honestly, literally almost killed me. And it almost killed our marriage as well. It needs to be uprooted. And again, it's not so much like, oh, you're loving your wife more than Jesus, which, because I would argue if a man is idolizing his wife, he's probably not actually loving her. He's probably needing her and manipulating her. So it's not so much loving her more than Jesus, it's finding your own value from her rather than him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I see that sometimes. In your book, you say, quote, men need help becoming men, true men, not nice guys who try to constantly appease their wives, hoping beyond hope that somehow she notices all their effort. And you say that men are trying to be what they think their wife wants them to be instead of trying to be the man that God has called them to be.
Yeah.
You also talk about how many men see their wife as a threat instead of a blessing because they're just so afraid of upsetting her and they just fear her disapproval so much. And I don't think that, as a marriage counselor, I thought about this as I was reading your book, and I definitely have specific couples that I can point to where I see this going on very
Mm.
clearly. And then I have some where I don't see this being an issue really at all. So I think it does depend. But there are for sure many men who are doing this that I see. And then, of course, all of those that I don't see. So why do you think that this happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that is a good point. I don't think it's every marriage or man who deals with that. It's definitely not all. There's other marriages. There's problems that are of a different sort altogether. But yeah, I was surprised when I wrote the book and started selling it, like how many guys would respond and be like, "Wow, this is me to a T," right? And so why does it happen? Uh, I do think it has to do with, partially anyway, it has to do with, like, for me, it had to do with the ecstasy of the newness of the romance early on. And that romance, um, it came along, I think, before I had established for myself what my identity was. It came along before I established the direction and vision I had for my life. Uh, and so I often think of like old Jewish tradition where the man and the woman would get betrothed. And that didn't necessarily mean that they started living together yet. She would often still live at her parents' house. But the man would go and build the house for the two of them. And they wouldn't live together, do anything before that was done. So he had to go figure himself out. He had to go somehow, I don't know all the economic situation back then, but he had to at least have enough money and provision to be able to build his own house. He had to have some structure in his life to then be able to invite her into. And I didn't have that. I had a passion for Jesus, but I did not know myself like I do now. And so without something to invite my wife into, where I had a vision and I would make the offer to her, do you want to be a part of this? Do you not? Does this line up with where you're going? Does it not? It was more like, instead of inviting her into my this thing that I was building, she became the thing that I was building.
Mm.
And she became the sole focus of my attention. And it's very easy because of that pleasurable romance that you're like, man, I want to keep this, and I want to keep uh, fostering that passion and that spark and everything. And so you just end up fixating on it, and you don't realize that by fixating on it, you're killing it. And
Mm-hmm.
when you are the hovering husband who's constantly buzzing around, seeing how can I get the next romantic engagement from my wife constantly, it's gonna like drive her insane. It's anyway, it would drive anybody insane. So I think that has a lot to do with it. It's that we don't know our own identity and mission, so she becomes that because she's so enticing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. At first, as you were talking, I was thinking of like of dopamine and how, you're getting it's exciting and you're getting something from it. So of course, anything that gives us dopamine, whether that's chocolate or gambling or sex or whatever, it can become something that we fixate on and just focus on getting more and more of. But the more you talked, it brought up a book that I use a lot in counseling with people, and it's I forget the exact name of it, but it's about primal questions. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've ever heard of it, and I've never talked about this on the show before.
Yeah.
But there's a guy who says that everybody has a primal question, and you can take a little assessment, and you can find out what your primal question is. There's 7 of them, and I found it to be super accurate. And I bring
Hmm.
this up because it's this deep question that everybody, you can have more than one, but typically you have one that is stronger than others. And it's this, like, you're always trying to get this question answered. And the men who are struggling most with what we're talking about, I always do primal question assessments for my couples, and I find that they usually have either a primal question of, am I loved?
Hmm.
Where they're not quite sure deep down if they're really loved. And so they are just constantly seeking to get that question answered through their wife. And they are kind of a bottomless pit. It's like no matter how much they feel it, they can't get enough. And the
Yeah.
other one that I see with this is men who have the primal question of, am I successful?
Yeah.
And they just need to know that they are being successful. Our marriage is successful, right? We're doing okay, right? I'm doing a
Yeah.
good job, right? You're pleased with me. You're not leaving me. We're not going to divorce, right? We're going to be successful. And I know that comes back around to, in your book, you mentioned the book Wild at Heart, which I've also read and love, and where it talks about men having a deep question of, do I have what it takes? And I
Yeah.
think
Right.
that all males have that question, it seems.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the thoughts going through my head as you're talking about that. I think it is so important to know who you are, to have that identity, and to be assured of it before you go into marriage, to be ready for marriage.
Absolutely. And that's, yeah, you're right. There's this, both of those questions I think are crucial for a man. And excuse me, I grew up without my dad around in middle and high school. And so that question of, actually, both questions were damaged because of that fact. Am I loved? I don't know, because I wasn't worth enough for him to stay. And do I have what it takes? Well, I don't know, because I have not had a man to invite me to have a seat at the table with other men. So I don't know if I belong there. And
Right.
so those are you're absolutely right. I think those are two totally primal questions. And if the man doesn't know the answer to those, then he's going to need his wife to constantly, constantly, constantly validate that.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's, we're kind of like, I think as Christian men, many of us at least, are a little bit disadvantaged in this department because we have this theology that tells us, well, I don't really have what it takes, and I'm not enough. And I understand there are truths to that, but I do think that we have adopted a self-deprecatory mindset that positions us to need somebody to validate us, because it's almost sinful if I'm trying to validate myself. And it's almost going against, what we would be told God says about us, which I don't agree with. But so we have a bit of like a perfect storm that goes into this at the moment
Okay, yeah,
anyway.
let's talk about that in a minute. Before we do, because I think that's the road to healing, right? That's how
Yeah,
you were able to restore yourself, and I want to hear all about that.
yeah.
Before we do, let's talk a little more about what did this do to your marriage? What happened in your marriage because of your primal questions and your making her the thing that you were building?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great question. So uh, we we had incredible chemistry at the very beginning. I knew from the first like time we really started dating, even though we were just finishing our senior year of high school, I was like, I'm going to marry her, and she felt the same way. So we had plenty of fire. Then, but I say that to show how damaging this stuff is because it's not like we never had any desire or heat or anything like that. We had plenty of it, but this whole dynamic took us to this point where I would I would go through most days with an incredible amount of like pain inside because I constantly could feel my wife's lack of attention, desire, affection, you name it. Uh, there would be seasons of our life where like a lot of the time throughout our days, like she wouldn't really even make eye contact with me, feeling complete, like it made it feel like she was just completely elsewhere in life. And it's not her fault. I mean, she if she made eye contact, you said the bottomless pit, she would actually used to use the term the black hole. Like if she made eye contact with me, it would just be sucking her life energy from her because I needed her so badly. So she wouldn't hardly want to make eye contact. There were times when I would try to go on dates more than we should because on dates it felt like I had her, but not in normal life. And
Hmm.
so we got to this point where she actually said once, Matt, I don't care anymore how you feel. And I don't want to hear it. And that was a huge blow to me because I thought, well, then how am I going to get you to do all the things that I'm wanting you to do if you won't even let me talk to you about them anymore? So it got bad. I mean, not like we were ever going to split because neither of us we always believed that we could make it somehow. We didn't know how, so it was not like it was that, but it got bad to the point where she didn't want to talk to me. She didn't really want to hang out with me. Going on dates presented more of an emotional uh, like stressor for her than actually good and enjoyable. So it was not good.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
that gives a clear enough picture, but I think it does.
yeah. And this was probably stemming a lot from just your deep insecurities, things from childhood, primal questions you had, right? You feel like you were just trying to get all of that met and answered through her. And in the beginning of your relationship, it felt like you were. And
Yeah.
so you kept trying to get that feeling back again, right?
Yeah, totally. And it felt like she was the one who had blown it all because she used to be answering those questions and now she'd all of a sudden decided not to.
Yeah.
So I was in this like deception of I'm being a great husband trying to love her up one side and down the other, and she's the one who's throwing up the roadblocks and getting cold and everything like that. And it's so deceptive.
Yeah. But really, you were suffocating her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were a Christian when you guys got together?
Yes, we both were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so I think that's important to understand that that didn't mean that you didn't struggle with these primal questions. It didn't mean that you had this all figured out, right? And you talk in your book about um, some of the ways that you think Christian men or the church kind of don't help or set you up for failure in this. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Like it's not that being both of us being Christians automatically meant that our marriage was great. And I used to think that it should. I got really frustrated with God because I was like, Lord, like what's the point of following you if all of life is so broken down? Like I thought that it was supposed to be magically fixed. Um, and so he and I have had many words together about all of those things over the years. And I I learned, so first of all, I learned that I wasn't getting a lot of help from church thinking when I was scouring marriage books from Christian authors. I was trying to listen to marriage sermons from teachers and pastors, and none of it was helpful. In fact, I would argue that for many of those things that I was trying to take in, I was already doing a lot of them. They talk about a lot of the advice is to um, love your wife the way that Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her and sacrificed for her. I would have told anybody, like, I constantly look to see how I can sacrifice for her all the time. That must not be the problem. uh, you know, a lot of the is to be more thoughtful and more romantic, like show her you're actually thinking of her. And I understand there are marriages out there where the husband doesn't do that, and so that might be a
Sure.
solution for some marriages, for sure. But to have that be the primary like flavor of a lot of the Christian teaching, I think misses a huge demographic because I also was doing those things and they weren't working. That was so much of my frustration. I was like, man, I'm trying to get romance here. Where is it at? Um, so there were there were those things that just did not solve the problem, and yet I looked in scripture and I saw that God says better things about marriage than what I was getting in mind. So there's got to be an answer. The other thing is that a lot of the church talks about, like, there's this flavor of if your marriage is kind of sucky, at least God has a plan for it and he knows what he's doing. I've had many guys come to me and tell me, yeah, it's been really tough however many years in our marriage, but God knows what he's doing at least. And I'm like, well, I don't know if God's doing it, because scripture says that he wants our marriage to be full of passion and fulfillment and joy and desire and sex and everything. So if your marriage is not in a good spot, I don't think that's him. I think he wants it to get into the good spot more than you do. And so, as from a man's perspective, though, so we have all of this clutter about marriage that we get in the church as well. And honestly, like, the discussion about sex is a whole other topic, but most of the church discussion about sex is just about staying pure. It's not really about how to create it in an ongoing fashion in a marriage where it gets better and better with time. It's not about how to have masculine feminine polarity. And in fact, we kind of make men and women just kind of become versions of each other. We all just get nice, and we don't foster unleashed femininity and masculinity, really. So there's all of that, but then with those primal questions, there's the very common phrase that we're all just sinners saved by grace. And I think this has become a a nearly, I don't want to say universal, but a very pervasive identity in churchgoers, or sinners saved by grace. Then you couple that with the teachings like, all of my righteousness is as filthy rags, and the human heart is deceitfully wicked above all of other things. So you have these men, and obviously women too, and so both deal with these things, but obviously we're talking about men here. So you have these men who have believed about themselves, especially if they want to really be good Christians, right? If they really want to love Jesus, so they want to take on what they're learning from church and what's being preached and everything. So they're wanting to do it right. And so they take on these things. I suck. All I am is a sinner. Even the good I try to do, like my righteousness being as filthy rags, it's worthless. And then like I can't be confident because I don't want any glory. It's only for God. Like I could go on about all of the different angles that attack a man's value. And I
And
don't believe. Oh yeah, go ahead.
all of those are true when it comes to our standing before God. When it
Yeah,
comes to salvation, right? We can't earn it. We all fall short. The best that we do is not going to be enough to earn us into heaven. But I think if you're going to apply that to earthly life and to relationships and you're standing to others, it's
yeah.
not accurate.
Right, right. It's not. Yeah, and you're right. Of course, we can't earn salvation. Uh, but as far as like the sinner saved by grace, that was true. That was true before I got saved.
Hmm.
I am not. I guess I'm meaning to emphasize. I am not a sinner. I was one, but Scripture now tells me that I'm a royal priest. It tells me that I have the 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 fullness of God dwelling inside of me. It Jesus in John chapter 17 says, "Father, the glory that you have given me, I have now given to them." I mean, you look at the incredible things that scripture says about us that are like borderline heretical. Like for me to sit here and say, "Yeah, Jesus gave his glory to me." I don't feel comfortable with this. But Jesus said it. And so I either can rebel in pride and arrogance and say, "No, I suck." Well, I think I'm being humble. Or I can submit to what he says and say, "Lord, this does not make sense to me, but you're sharing your glory with me. I'm I'm deemed worthy. Okay,
Yeah.
help me to embrace it because it's more than I can understand."
Yeah. The gospel's meant to be empowering, not condemning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And so, with the human heart being deceitful and wicked, that's an Old Testament verse, and that is also negating other Old Testament scriptures that say that God is going to take our heart of stone, which probably was that deceitful and wicked one, and replace it with a heart of flesh where his word is written on it, and his spirit itself is dwelling in it. I don't think we have a deceitful and wicked heart anymore. So we think that salvation paid my punishment, but it left me the same. And I think that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm. We are a new creation.
Right, right. We're a new
Yeah.
creation. And so if I'm going into marriage with all of this religious baggage that I'm a deceitful man, I'm a sinner, I don't have anything worthwhile to give me, then who wants to be, or to give out, not to give me, who wants to be married to that? I mean, thankfully, my wife did. But we've realized, oh, that led us down a bad path.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So, what's the answer? You talk in your book about identity, principle, and mission. Tell everyone about that.
Yeah. So guys with marriages in rough situations, I mean, whenever I work with them, we don't really work on the marriage at first because that's the answer is not in the marriage. The answer is not in new tactics to uh, talk to your wife, new tactics to try to initiate sex, whatever it is. Like that's not the answer. The answer is in the broken stuff happening on the inside of the individual. And Romans 12:2 says that we get transformed by the renewal of our mind. So people who are living in a position in a place like this, of course, what they're wanting is transformation. And I would go so far as to say that transformation in the external circumstances of somebody's life is also rooted in the renewing of the mind on the inside. So whatever it is that you're wanting transformation in, Romans 12 is the summarized version of the answer. It has to come down to me renewing the way that I think. And I tell a lot of guys, listen, I know, I trust you. I hear it in your voice that you love Jesus and you want to serve him, you want to honor him, you want to live for him. But I'm telling you, in your daily life, you are continually agreeing with hell and not heaven. And that's why the gospel doesn't feel like it's doing anything for you. You feel like you're getting left in the dust and unchanged and still dealing with all the same old crap you dealt with before you became a Christian. It's because you're giving your allegiance to Satan and essentially saying, because I'm doing this, I'm giving you the right to reap your results in my life. And so we have to, like in the other scriptures, 2 Corinthians 10, where it talks about how we have weapons of warfare that are not physical, but that are powerful to pull down strongholds and tear down arguments and opinions that are contrary to the knowledge of God. And so we need to take every thought captive. So really the answer begins with, what am I believing that is actually a lie from hell, even though I thought it was truth? Even though it feels factual, even though maybe if I look at my life, it actually is factually correct. I can't base my belief system on the facts of my life. I can't base my beliefs on if I performed well in the last 5 years as a man or as a husband or not. Because if I go look at my last 5 years and I think, well, I kind of sucked at it, then there might be some justification in there, but it's going to bring me to death. And so I have to choose to let my thoughts be shaped by and only by what God says about me, what he says about my life, what he says about my marriage, what he says about my wife. I mean, it goes into renewing my mind about how I'm thinking about her as well, because, like you mentioned earlier, like wives becoming kind of a threat to their husbands rather than a blessing, and men who are constantly hurt because their wife has grown cold and distant now see her as a threat and they begin to conceive of her that way. And that totally influences their energy when they're around her. It influences their confidence, everything. So we have to renew our mind about everything. We have to do a major clean out and begin to plant the truth in there so the gospel can do its work. And I think of the parable in I'm not going to remember the chapter, but one of Mark's chapters, the parable of the sower and the seeds and the different soils and everything like that. And that parable I used to think was only for, it was about how basically the three bad soils are the 3/4 of the people who are going to hear the gospel and not be saved, and there's 1/4 who will. And I've come to believe that since it's all about Christians, it's all about people who are already saved following Jesus, and there's still three versions of bad soil that I can have, where the seed of his word is not going to do anything in me, and I'm not going to see the 30, 60, or 100-fold harvest that he says the good soil will produce. So it really is about that. And am I taking what he says and digesting it and doing something with it?
I love that. I love it. I'm like, I could listen to you talk all day. Preach it.
Well, that's good because I feel like I'm having to try to stop myself so I can give you a chance to chime in.
And so men need to get really rooted in who they are, who God says they are, what their identity is now in Christ as a new creation. And that's identity, right? And then you talk about principle. Tell us about principle.
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about Adam and Eve and those three concepts of being a man of identity, man of principle, and a man on mission. All you can find them all in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. Um, so Adam had received a a command from God before Eve was on the scene, and it was have all these trees you want to eat from, but not that one. Don't do that one. And so there was this principle that was established. Okay, if I'm going to be a man who is in connection with God, who is just humming on all cylinders, thriving in life, I am going to live according to the principles that my Father has given me, and I will not eat that tree from that tree. So Eve comes along, and first of all, I have a sense that Adam had before Eve and Satan were doing their conversation. I have a sense that Adam had already kind of begun to idolize her. He's watching this serpent infiltrate his domain. He's watching this serpent begin to steal his wife away from him. And he's not doing anything about it, probably because he wants to keep her happy. I'm now starting to read into the story, but I know it is very likely.
I
So
see that play out a lot. It's a common story. So I can see
yeah. So it's
why you
almost
think
like
that.
it's a motif of history, right? Yeah. So he's probably already idolizing her, and he's not out taking dominion. God said, "Go into all the earth." He's hanging around, so he's not doing what he was put there to do. And when she falls to the temptation, rather than staying true to his principles of I won't eat this thing, even if she does, he goes along with her, probably because he was enticed by her beauty and wanting to be connected and passion and everything. So I don't want to butt heads. I don't want to conflict with her. I don't want to stand my ground even if it means that she gets upset with me. So I'm going to do this. And so it's I see it in the very beginning in that story there, and so translate that to men now, to me, to us. In my marriage, it would play out in very small ways and big ways, but small ways, like in my own thinking. Well, I don't want to go do this activity because she might need me with our daughter in some way, and then she'll be upset because I'm gone doing this thing that I would like to do while she's here alone. Or, man, a lot of guys can relate to this. Let's say they have a clash of a principle and this idolatry of their wife, and maybe they have wanted to establish a workout routine because they want to get their body strong, they want to get attractive. This is important to them. They haven't done it for years because of the demands of life, the demands of the marriage, or whatever, and they are wanting to get back into it. And we have discussions about it, and it comes out a lot. Like I'll present this possible scenario to them. So imagine you're wanting to go to the gym and begin this routine, but this thought comes into your head. But if I stay home or I go right home after work and I don't go to the gym, I'll have the chance to pitch in with dinner. I'll be able to watch the kids, and maybe I'll be able to have sex later tonight. But if I go to the gym, then she might be more frazzled. She she might feel more alone and like I'm not there with her and I'm not supporting her. And so what if sex is off the table? So that's the kind of thing. It's obviously could have infinite ways of playing out, but that's the kind of dynamic where not being a man of principle starts to come in. So I sacrifice my good and right desires and even needs. I would argue that it's a need to go work out, to go get healthy. I sacrifice those things for the sake of trying to get one more crumb from my wife's table. And it is not attractive at all. In fact, a lot of non Christian marriage authors talk about men needing to have their non negotiables, the things that they are not willing to compromise on, even if it is for her sake, that they won't budge. Other areas that can play out in a marriage with Christians is in tithing. If a man has a conviction, I want to tithe, but my wife doesn't, a lot of times he won't. And now he's starting to sacrifice that, again, that God-given principle, to go down a path that's destructive because his wife wants to go down that path. And of course it can go both ways, so don't hear me as saying it's always the women who are doing the wrong things,
Sure.
um but yeah, that's where the men get weak in this idea of principle. And it kills the desire too, because we need to have the otherness, principle and identity both. But sometimes when a man has this thing that he wants that's going to cause an argument, it's actually good. And a lot of men don't understand that. But like, you have to have the otherness where you're not just like this all the time, but there's some distance here. So like, if there's a rubber band around your fingers, like when you create the distance, it'll draw her to you, rather than if you're always hovering, there's that rubber band is slack and there's no pull. Right? So having some convictions and principles that maybe even you disagree on actually can work in your favor in the long run.
Because those things were attractive in the beginning, right? You
Yeah.
had you had otherness in the beginning, and that worked. And then as you start to lose that otherness, you're like, wait, something's going wrong here, and I think I'm doing the right thing. And you're not
Mm-hmm.
saying don't sacrifice in order to have quality time with your wife. Don't You're not saying like do what you want to do and never think, oh, she's got three little kids at home, I should sacrifice this for now to help her. I mean, there are times to do that. What you're saying is don't sacrifice things that are of principle, that are non-negotiables, that are what God is calling you to, or what is healthy for you, in order to do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying, because that can go too far. People
Mm-hmm.
can hear that and be like, oh, okay, well, now I'm going to be a jerk, and no. So, and I would even say you can sacrifice things of principle in a way where it's like, okay, let's use the gym example. Today is not going to be a good day for me to go to the gym, and even though it's normally my gym day, because my wife really needs me. I want to go be there for her. 100%. The problem is really in the foundation that I've laid and in the energy that I'm doing this in. So if okay, I'll use the example. John chapter 13, it talks about where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. And this is a very big, Christian kind of buzz phrase for marriage, especially husbands washing their wife's feet. Not no offense if anybody's ever done it, but my wife has often said, Matt, please don't ever wash my feet as like an act of like romance or love. And I'm like, happily, we'll do other stuff. We don't need to do that, right? But
We won't get that kinky.
right. Right. Exactly. There is no turn on in the foot washing ceremony in our home, which I'm willing to take that hit. I don't feel the deprivation of that in any way. But in that chapter, so a verse that like slapped me in the face so hard when I saw it. I don't remember the number of the verse, but it says that Jesus, he knew that he had come from the Father, and that all things had been given into his hands, and that he was going to return to the Father. And then it says, so he got up and took off his outer robe and washed his disciples' feet. And there was this weird connection there. I was like, what do you mean so? How does the one thing cause him to do the other? That seems like a disconnect. But the thing is, he got low and sacrificed and served from a place of strength, knowing who he was, knowing how much value he had, and not this like I'm giving up everything, even my identity, for the sake of my church, because he didn't. And so if a husband is sacrificing for his wife from a place of, I know my worth. I know it's important that I go do these things for myself, that I go work out. I know that me going fishing is a fine thing to do and good. And but when my wife needs me, I'm there for her. But if a man doesn't have a lifestyle established where he does value himself, then all that sacrifice is almost wasted. I heard Jordan Peterson talk on some Instagram reel that my wife sent me. Uh, he was talking about how good men need to be dangerous. And the guy was like, so you're saying that they need to be able to hurt people? And he was like, well, yes, but they need to be able to hurt people with the character to not hurt people. And he was saying virtue without strength is actually not virtue. It's almost impossible to be a good man if you don't have the strength to be a bad man.
I actually used that quote in my episode on toxic masculinity, which
Oh, did you really?
I will link here for everybody.
Awesome. Awesome. That's so funny. So preaching to the choir here,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But so that's the thing, is like, if a man is not confident enough, if he doesn't have stuff in his life established that's important to him, where he does it and it's his own individuality, if he doesn't have any of that, then his sacrifice for his wife is not virtue at all. It's just worship.
It's all about where it's coming from.
Exactly. Exactly. So
The
you have to
motivation.
establish that otherness so that you can sacrifice.
Yeah. And I think one thing that you talk to people about and help people with that will be super interesting to most listeners is, how did you reignite that sexual desire in your marriage and your wife? How did you get her to want you again? That's what all the men really want to know.
Yeah, I know they're all gonna like fast forward to this point in the talk, right? Because that's the thing. And yeah, any of my like posts or things that I do that are about that, they usually get the most engagement. So it's true. Um, I I tell men the two sexiest traits, at least for my wife, and maybe there's somebody out there who's different, but you can't go wrong with these at least. The two sexiest traits are confidence and joy. The confidence often makes sense. Joy is sometimes like, huh? Joy is sexy? And my wife would tell you the same thing. If in seasons of life where I have not been joyful, that's where it's like, oh, I don't really want to be around him. And so if we're in life and there's difficult things going on, different challenges, whatever, from whatever direction, but I'm like smiling and happy, being like a goofball, making a fool of myself with our girls, like, and I'm light, it's so attractive to her. Okay, so that's a great target, getting confident and joyful, but there's still the question, okay, but still how? And that's also only part of the picture, I think, of sexual attraction, but that's a big one. And so how do you do that? I think that comes back to mindset renewal. If I'm constantly thinking that I suck and that I don't have anything good to offer, I'm not going to be joyful. So the gospel really is my doorway into joy and confidence. So there's that. Okay, so let's say I'm getting on this journey of mindset renewal. I'm beginning to do that all, but my marriage still isn't rebuilt and there's still not a lot of sexual attraction and stuff. What do I do there? So I I tell men, you've got to first of all diversify your assets. So if you're only really looking to revamp your marriage but not anything else in your life, that's not going to be very good, and your wife is going to feel the pressure of you trying to get sex from her, and she's really the only thing you're focusing on. So from a place of confidence and joy. You need to start connecting with, well, what do I want in life? And let me go get it. Let me go out and conquer stuff. Like it's like the movies, right? I mean, Hollywood gets some stuff right where the guy is out fighting a battle and he's not the nicest guy in the world. He's not always the most gentle and loving guy in the world, but the woman is attracted to him when he comes home. And there's that welcome home sex or whatever. Like they're like, and guys are like, man, why doesn't my wife feel that way about me? And it's probably because you're not carrying yourself as a man who's dangerous out to the world to go out there and do some stuff because you've made your wife your sole adventure. So they've got to go rebuild some other stuff in life. And in the marriage, I think that if a man is beginning to conduct himself in those ways, the confidence and joy, the mindset renewal, the going out and doing other things like that, right there's probably the majority of the battle. That's the foundational stuff that needs to get changed, and then from there it's a matter of um, still being gentle, being kind, being attentive, being an emotional safe place for her. I have discovered that a large part of rebuilding sexual attraction is being able to handle arguments, being able to handle maybe her getting upset with you for something without you losing your own cool, without you taking it personally, without you getting defensive, and actually being like, wow, babe, I'm so sorry. Even if everything inside of me is like, but what you're saying is not totally accurate. If I'm like, I'm so sorry because I did make you feel this way. Like being able to be strong enough to weather her feminine emotions is a very attractive thing. And I talk about it like I'm really, really good at it all the time. I'm on my journey.
It's easier to know things than it is to do them, right?
Exactly. So I have not arrived, but I'm way farther down the path than I was, 10 years ago. I will say that. So there's all of that. There's also just like, think about when you're dating. What was attractive at the beginning? Well, yeah, I was probably pretty confident. I was probably proactive. I was like looking for ways to, if we're at a restaurant and they brought her meal wrong, oh, I'll go to handle that and save you, be the knight in shining armor, and we'll get your meal right. Whereas once you're married for a while, you're like, well, you can take care of it. You can go ask about it. Like there's all these things that we let go of, you know. Um, trying to think if there's anything else. I don't know, but yeah, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's all really, really true. Great advice. I would add to that, I think it's similar, but I hear when couples come in and the wife is not physically attracted to her husband anymore, one of the things she says, I feel like his mother.
Oh,
And I
yeah,
think that goes along with a lot of what you're talking about. That a lot of
yeah.
what you're talking about produces that feeling in the woman, but a woman does not feel sexually attracted to someone who feels like her son.
No, you're so right. You're so right. I'm so glad you brought that up because my wife used to say that too.
Hmm.
So, you're
Yeah.
talking our story here.
But I think that just goes with if you're confident and you're proactive and you're taking care of things, then she's not going to feel like your mother. So I think we're kind of
Right.
saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, because a mom like because sometimes guys get confused by the fact that their wife thinks that way, but a mom has more responsibility for your well-being and your happiness when you're a kid.
Hmm.
And so if you're transferring that role to your wife and now she's responsible for your well-being and your happiness, then she's going to feel that way.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of, I think that's probably the root of what it was for my wife, that she was responsible for whether or not I was okay.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Super not attractive.
I love everything you're saying. So this is going to help so many people.
Oh,
Is
good.
is there anything else that you want to share or add to this conversation before we wrap up?
Yeah. So I think an important part of all of this is redefining or reestablishing what is possible in my life. Because when you're struggling with these different things, whether it's just your own individual depression or discouragement, whether it's a marriage thing, whether it's a health thing, or whether it's whatever, we can start to settle in this place of, I guess this is just what I've got to deal with. And we have this idea that whatever happens in my life is by default God's will for my life. So if my wife is fading and her attraction from me and our marriage is whatever it is, yeah, like I just got to put up with it. And so I think a very important part of this, because Jesus said, like, according to your faith, be it done to you. And he told a woman who reached out and touched his cloak, like, your faith made you well, not mine, not Jesus's. So if I have faith for a negative outcome, or if my faith only goes so far as to say, God's going to help me endure through a hard marriage, then I'm probably not going to get anything but that. So, or it goes like, God's going to help me endure the sickness, or God's going to, he's going to help us get by, even though we're never going to have that much money or whatever. Like, whatever I believe for is what I'm setting myself up to get. And so I think that for men who want to go on a journey of transformation, they need to get serious about looking at, what does Scripture actually say about whatever it is you're wanting to see change? Because if not 100% of the time, it says better stuff than what we typically think our lot in life is. So we have to watch for where our expectations are being shaped by other people's mediocre experiences, or if they're being shaped, like Jesus said, you have made the word of God have no effect by your traditions of men. So if our expectations are shaped by church tradition teaching that is actually not in line with God's word teaching, then that's an important thing here. So to go figure out, what does he say about this part of my life, and I am going to anchor my expectations on that. Like my when we were going through our stuff, my big marriage verse was from Proverbs 5. It was like, let her breast satisfy you at all times, and may you forever be intoxicated in her love. And I was like, man, that is an erotic verse that God is putting in there. But that must mean that he wants this fiery, passionate marriage. And so I'm not gonna settle. And it lights, if you can find what he says and latch your faith onto that, it lights a fire in you so that you don't take no for an answer anymore. So I think that's probably an important piece of this puzzle here.
Absolutely. That's very inspirational. God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we think or imagine. And do we believe that, or do we not believe that?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, where can people find out more about you, work with you, get your book? Because I'm sure people are going to want to know more.
Yeah. So my main website is manwarriorking.com. If you go to manwarriorking.com/DNA, that's where the book sales page is. The book's also on Amazon. You can go there and order it as well, or you can order it from me. On the website, I've also got other courses and things, information about coaching and working with me. I also have the Man Warrior King podcast, which is on Apple and Spotify and all the other little ones that no one seems to really use anymore. You can find me on YouTube as well. You can find me on the social networks, but really the most best way to find me is through the podcast and the website.
Awesome. And I'll link all of that in the show notes here. Thank you so much, Matt, for your time. This has been really, really good. I'm excited for everybody to hear this interview.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Absolutely. It's an honor. And I'm excited to be here with you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I look forward to any other future conversations we might have in the future.
Absolutely.